moment, or was it like the arc of the character? What convinced you?
I mean, I just found it very intriguing. I think the way in of finding Ruth and this, there was just such a mystery around her. And I think what I found interesting about the story is that the story really sort of takes off where most stories end, where she comes home. And in a sort of classic hero's journey, that's the end. And I think I found it intriguing about this story that coming home is actually sometimes the hardest thing to do, and confronting who you are, and addressing your family, and we can all do fabulous things in the world, but I think often it's really hard to come home and just be back where all of your demons and all of your issues began, and I think that I found that interesting and refreshing. And I also loved the fact that it, to me, I read it as a story about 3 generations of women finding their power, and I just felt that was, so needed in the world. And I wasn't, I loved the script. I was just like, I want to meet Julia. I want to talk to this woman, and we met sort of like a week later, I think, and then I just really clicked with Julia, and it was sort of from there.
So we said we'd get back to sort of the question of distribution and kind of talking about like the feminine power of the movie and the feminine energy that you talked about. A lot's been written like out of Sundance this year, out of South by, about how festivals are focusing more and more on female-led and women-made films, but they're not getting picked up. They're not getting distribution.
Well, I think it's a twofold issue, right? Because I think a lot of films aren't getting picked up and getting distribution right now that are made independently, because the independent market is really shifting, and there is not really a model left for independent distribution in the sort of anything other than just kind of very, very small stuff. So that's just like a truth in general. And then what is left is in general a historical model. I find both the way that films are built and also the way that films are distributed are about the way films have performed in the past. And if you're looking to the past to decide how a film is going to perform, inevitably that model is going to be both sexist and racist, because that is the past. So it's also a little bit of the present, but inevitably that's kind of what you're going to come up against, right? And so there is a little bit of that you chafe against, and you have to kind of push forward. Now, I say this partially because Julie and I are about to make a movie for Disney for their new streaming service, but as Disney comes into that streaming service space, and also they just bought Fox, so Fox also comes into that space in a pretty robust way, and becomes a really a real competitor for the Netflixes of the world. And obviously Amazon's in that space, Apple is in that space. I have a TV show at Apple, but inevitably they're going to get into the feature space as well, as all of these companies start to create content for quote-unquote streaming, right? And that becomes the dominant model of film. But there's obviously always going to be your big studio theatrical releases, but just in terms of the way smaller films get built in the streaming space, it's going to be people making those movies in-house. It's not going to be as much independent production, but that model is future-facing, right? That model is not about what's performed in the past, but about what's going to get us subscribers in the future, right? So the way that those films get greenlit and the films that are chosen for that is a very different metric than the traditional foreign sales. And how can we sell this overseas theatrically, which isn't really a market anymore, and how can we sell this domestically theatrically, which isn't a really market anymore for these types of films. So I'm very hopeful about where we go from here, but we're just we've been in and continuing to be in these kind of this very contracted, but then contracted in order to expand kind of space. So I think people are figuring it out. We have, with this movie, we're in the middle of negotiating. There are probably going to be 2 deals that we do on this movie for various platforms. We're in the middle of negotiating both of them. I'm very satisfied with where I think we'll end up, but it's just taken a much longer time because it's not a traditional deal. Like, we're not making the type of deal that you would have traditionally made out of a Sundance or a South by or a Tribeca or Cannes, whatever, any of those festivals that it's like, okay, let's come, we're gonna write a check and we're gonna release it and that's gonna be it. You sort of have to think a bit more creatively about the way your film and the story you're telling is going to live in the marketplace.
I mean, at the same time, I was literally reading this morning that 11 out of 12 of the first weeks of this year, the box office, the number one film at the box office, was either led by a woman or by people of color.
But that speaks to what I'm saying about...
But that's just it. It's like, starting with Hunger Games, you've had this dynamic where more and more women-led films were cleaning up the box office at a higher percentage. But that's,
Sure.
It's been years, and distributors still haven't figured that out.
Because the
That's what
model
it
is, it's been years, but like, again, like the past 5 years doesn't really make a dent in 50 years of data, you know? So, I say 50 years, not really, but you know what I mean? It's like, it just doesn't, unfortunately, very often those films get ascribed, like those films are outliers or this, or, well, it's actually just based on an IP that was successful, so it's not really about this or it's not really about that. It's just like, there's always a way to talk around all of it. But I 100% agree with you. I think people want to see a much more diverse representation. I think people want to see themselves on screen. People want to see people of all races and genders and sexualities on screen, and that is much more, and I'm sure I'm forgetting some category there, I apologize if I am. But I think that it is very much where we are headed, and I think the model is starting to adapt to where we are headed, and I am not a pessimist about, you know, yeah, I guess the theatrical experience becomes a little bit narrower, but that's just kind of a reality at the end of the day. I think there's always going to be a theatrical experience. You're never going to be able to, there's never going to be anything that is like sitting in a theater with people watching a movie. That's always going to exist. That's never going to change. And there will be opportunities for that. Festivals like this, festivals all over the world, smaller theatrical windows for certain movies. You know, Amazon's collapsed the theatrical window in a pretty aggressive way. There are going to be new ways that happens. And as I said, once the bigger players get into that space and start shifting the model, you know, things are going to change in a more dynamic way that I think people are still kind of casting about, trying to say, well, what's the future going to be? And I think over the past year or two, it's become really clear what it is going to be. And so over the next 3 to 5 years, as that kind of sets into place, I think we'll see a bit more of a streamlining.
Sure. Gugu, you've worked with Gina Price-Bythewood on Beyond the Lights, this year with Ava DuVernay on Wrinkle in Time. I'm assuming, I know from experience that, you know, women behind the scenes in Hollywood are having a lot of conversations right now about, like, how do we move ourselves forward, how do we work with more women, how do we change the conversation? What kind of conversations are you having with these filmmakers about this situation and what you can do to change it?
Well, I think ownership is really the key, you know, and I think, you know, certainly something that I always remember Ava DuVernay saying is that, you know, it's not about knocking on doors, it's about building your own house. And I think finding the stories, you know, beyond, you know, telling your own stories. And I think, you know, that's what's been so inspiring for me, you know, working with directors like Amara Sante, Gina, as you mentioned, and Ava and Julia. You know, I think it's women writers as well, you know, and people having the courage and, you know, nurturing female screenwriters and having the courage to tell stories from your own point of view. I think, you know, for a long time, the point of view of movies has been quite singular, and I think, you know, for me, what is really interesting is, you know, and the projects clearly that I'm drawn to are, you know, are the characters that are, you know, told from a female point of view, often from a female perspective, and a female writer. So I think it's, you know, it's about having the courage to also, you know, in the wake of Time's Up and Me Too, you know, there female directors and writers are feeling more of a sense of community, I think, than ever before, as opposed to, and again, often as an actress, there is, and case in point in this film as well, there's sort of a mother character, there's sort of a middle character, and then there's a child, but, or there's certain, you don't often have many peers in your, in a film. You sometimes are the only person representing your generation or your gender, and I think that, what's happened in the last 6 months or so has really brought people together and given a sense of solidarity and community.
Well, I don't want to skip too much past actually discussing this movie. So let's loop back just a little bit. There's that moment in